have this weird area in my living room where I've got the drum kit and then the kitchen counter and then just all this unused space. And so I had the idea of making a floating cabinet that goes on the underside of the counter that gives me some really usable storage space for some of my go-to tools. It's got a really unique way of how it mounts, and I think you guys are gonna like it. So let's go ahead and dive into the build. Okay, so I decided I'm not gonna be super fancy with this one. Essentially, there's gonna be 3 pieces that make the outer carcass, and I'm just gonna use a festool domino to do some butt joints because I've never tried that before, and I'm relatively new to using the domino, so I just wanna see how it goes. So we'll be doing that. We're gonna have a sliding dovetail for the brace in the front, which we'll take care of after we cut the main pieces to size. And then essentially from there, it's just a few drawers. So it's a really straightforward project, but it's gonna be a cool way of getting some organization in my kitchen. So let's go ahead and get the carcass cut out. Okay, so I should have done this step before this, but what we're gonna do is just lay out the lines for the dominoes now. If I had done it before cutting these, I could have just done one continuous line. Instead, I'll have to kind of mark it on each one, but no big deal. We'll go ahead and mark it and cut out the domino slots. Okay, so if we take a look here at the festool domino, we can see here that this is the depth adjustment guide. So this is gonna tell you in millimeters how far the bit's gonna plunge into the wood. Now, I have 1/2 inch red oak here, which is approximately 12.8 millimeters, a little less. So you can see here, the lowest setting here is 12 millimeters. So if I put this up on the lowest setting and plunge this, we're just gonna blow straight through the wood. So instead, what I've done here is designed and 3D printed this little clip. And what this is gonna do is just clip right here onto the plunge bar. And what that actually gonna do is plunge it exactly 8 millimeters, which means I'm gonna be left with a 4 millimeter wall. And so this is gonna give me the exact depth I need. And when I'm done, I can just take this and pop it off. Okay, so looking at this, we can see here that because we went, only 8 millimeters into this, and this is a 40 millimeter domino, we actually need to go extra long into the other one. Not only that, but this only goes to 28 millimeters on the domino, so what we're gonna have to do is trim down these floating tenons a little bit. So we'll plunge 28 millimeters into the back piece of the carcass here, which is the max the festool domino can go. Then we'll just trim these down to make sure it all fits together, and we'll be good to go. So let's go ahead and cut the next mortises. So I put the domino on the smallest or the tightest fit. You can see here that the dominoes go in, but they are pretty tight. Now, if there's any, mistakes in terms of how accurate we were lining it up to the line on any of these others, it's gonna be impossible to get all 5 of these to go in at the same time. But when you move the domino to the looser setting, I don't like how big the actual mortise becomes. So what I do is I just cut them all in the tight setting, and then what I'll do is I'll run a few of these over to the belt sander and just take a little bit off the width just to give them a little bit of play, and then we can go ahead and do a dry fit. Okay, so that paid off. You can see this went together great. It holds its form with no glue at all. The joints are actually very tight and it's nice and square. So that worked out perfectly. Quick and easy way to take care of the carcass. Next, what we're gonna do is the sliding dovetail, as well as mark out for the drawer slides and get on to cutting that. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little change up here. I figure instead of doing the sliding dovetails, since we were already using the domino and already have this little stop set up, I'm just gonna go ahead and use 2 dominoes for this little cross brace here that the top shelf will sit on. So we'll mark these and just cut these out, pretty similar to how we did the previous. Okay, so the setup for cutting these is slightly more complicated, and I'm going to show how I figured this out here. So if we look at the domino, I actually have to make the cut with the domino on its face like this, and the distance from here, the base, which we're going to be using to reference against the square, to the center of the cutter is 10 millimeters. So that's 10 millimeters right there. So what I've done is I 3D printed this little 10 millimeter spacer. In order to determine where this needs to be, here's what we want about it. So here is the board that's going to be connecting in here. I know that the center line of the domino on here I have marked with a line, and I know that that center line needs to be 1.25 inches from the top according to my drawing. So I also cut this spacer, which is 1.25 inches. So what I did was I set this here, then I put our panel in place, I marked that center line, then taking this off and putting a square at that center line, I put our 10 millimeter spacer and then butted our square up against that, and that's where our domino needs to go to get the center line exactly where we need it. So hopefully that made some sense. It is a little bit tricky. Let's go ahead and cut the other ones. So I recut that so it sits a little lower, and that's way better. That's where I need it. I actually figured out what I'm going to do with those empty domino mortises, but you'll have to stay tuned to see that. So now that we've got the carcass completed here, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the top shelf here, which will be just a 1/4 inch red oak panel that'll then go into a groove on the back piece. And then from there we can get our attention switched to the drawers. But first, let's go ahead and get the panel and shelf in. So we've got the carcass put together, we've got the groove along the back here that's going to house the panel. So before proceeding with the next step, I'm going to go ahead and get this glued together so that we can have everything put together in its final form for doing the drawers. Okay, so we've got the case glued together and this is looking good. So it's time to move on to the drawer slides. Now this is gonna be pretty simple because based off the dimensions I have, all I have to do is space these drawer slides by 1/4 inch for each pair. So what I've got here is just a 1/4 inch brass setup block. I'm just gonna use this here. I can then reference the drawer slide against that and reference the front to make sure we're nice and flush, and then put the drawer into place and it should be looking good. Okay, so we've got the drawer slides in, probably one of my least favorite parts of a project, just because it's kind of tedious and annoying and you gotta get them perfect for the drawers to run smoothly. But we've got all 6 in here, so what we can do is start milling up the lumber for the drawers. Okay, so we've got all of our drawer sides and fronts cut out here. Now what I'm doing is I'm using 3/8 inch stock. So I milled it down to 3/8 inch, which is pretty thin, and it turns out that the drawer lock bit I was gonna use on the router table actually won't work for stock this thin. So for the sake of not taking too much more time and kind of getting this thing built, we're just gonna proceed and go ahead and use the domino with the smallest 4mm dominoes. And we're gonna do the same technique as before where we kind of partially plunge into the drawer fronts and then do longer plunges into the drawer sides to get the whole floating tenon to fit. So let's get these drawers made and we'll use some basswood for the bottoms and we'll keep going. Okay, so with the sides all cut out and the drawer frames made, the next step is to put the groove in the bottom of the drawer sides in order to fit the bottom panel for the drawer. Now this is pretty easy. I'm gonna do it on the router table, and on the sides here it's just a straight cut all the way through. It gets a little trickier here with the end pieces because we don't want the groove coming through the butt joint and then showing a gap. So we actually have to do a stopped plunge cut on the router table, and it's not too hard, but it's never the most fun thing. And so we're gonna go over to the router table and knock out this last drawer. Okay, so as I alluded to, these plunge cuts are just a little bit trickier to do. We can see what we've got to do is not come through the end. So what I'm actually gonna do is start with the router bit turned on, and I'm gonna slowly drop the piece over the bit just like this. I know just based off the spacing I've done previously that I need to drop it right on the edge of my sacrificial fence. So I'm gonna drop it, come all the way through till the end hits the other side of the fence, and then I'm gonna pull back a little, turn off the router table, let the bit completely stop, and then I'll lift the piece off and we'll have a stopped groove in the bottom of our panel. Okay, with the sides cut out and the grooves in place, it's time to do the drawer bottoms. So we've got all the drawers put together here. The basswood bottoms look nice, and these are ready to be installed. But before I actually do that, I'm gonna kind of take everything apart and sand and put a coat of finish on so that I can get these drawers glued together before we do the last piece of the puzzle, which will be doing the drawer fronts. Drawers are finished on the interior and they are drying up from the glue up here. So these should be done any minute now, and then I can start to sand and finish the outside. While I was doing that, or while that's curing, I am getting some stock milled up for the drawer fronts. So I'm gonna do frame and panel drawer fronts. The key to doing the tongue and groove rail and style joints here for the drawer fronts on these thinner pieces is gonna be this thin kerf rip blade. The kerf here is only 3/32 of an inch compared to 1/8 of an inch on a normal blade. So that's gonna allow us to get a smaller groove and therefore a smaller panel and a thinner overall look. So this is key. It's also a nice blade to have on hand anyway, but we're gonna be using this to make the cuts. So to get started, we're gonna rip our pieces to width and then get started on the grooves. So we've got tons of stock cut out because it's gonna take some practice cuts to dial in everything perfectly, so definitely make some extras. This is probably way more than enough for what I need. What we're gonna do now is the groove in all of these, which are gonna be the rails and stiles. I've got a 1/4 inch groove in my plan, so I'm gonna use a 1/4 inch setup block to get the blade a 1/4 inch from the table, and then I'm gonna run these all through and put the groove in. After that, we can start cutting them to width. And that is why it's always good to mill up an extra piece for all the parts you're making. You can see this totally chipped off at the router because we were going against the grain, and so this one was useless, so thank goodness we had an extra. But let's show you how this goes together. So again, we put that groove off center on the rails and stiles. We can see that now this is flush with this, which is the back of the rail here, and that's going to allow us to give a attachment point for attaching the drawer fronts. So we've got all the parts finished, all the construction joinery is all finished. We've got our 3 drawer fronts here. They look really great, but they're just dry assembled. So now we gotta do all the sanding and put on all the outer coated finish. So that's gonna take a bit, and I hate sanding, so I'm gonna cue the montage and we'll get this done. So what I thought was gonna take about an hour or two in the morning actually took almost half the day, but I finally got all the drawers in and the spacing is perfect. Luckily, the drawer fronts are the exact same height as the drawers, and so it's gonna be really easy to put them on. I can just use the same spacers. So check out the alignment, and then I'm gonna screw them in and finish this project up. Okay, so now we get to what makes this project really unique. So here we're in my main living room kitchen area, and oftentimes I'm sitting here working on projects, which is why there's always kind of all this junk sitting out there. It's not junk, but it's stuff I work on, but I don't always want it out because it doesn't look the best. And so right here, I've kind of got this unused space, especially because the drum set's here, so it's just kind of this unused space. And if I looked under here, I realized there's this gap. Which got me thinking, if I were to, use this little gap to mount something and then clip it over the edge, I could actually put the drawers here as like a hanging drawer system. You can see here, you remember these two mortises from the Domino. So I designed and 3D printed this bracket, which just press fits into there. And then this hook fits right over the countertop like this. And so that's gonna take the weight of the front of the drawers. While on the back side, I'm going to mount a little cleat and then screw the back into there. And that's why I had to leave this panel removable so that I can get a drill in there. So it'll make more sense as I do it, but let's get this installed. I've made this little cleat here, and I used the hand plane to get it so it perfectly fits in this gap. There's a little taper to it, so it kind of needed to be custom fit. And I've got just some countersunk holes here, so I'm gonna go ahead and get this mounted first. We're gonna use this guy to get in there, and these work great. Probably couldn't see much of what was going on there. It was a bit stressful, but this is literally rock solid. You can see here it's nice and flush there. You can see the cleat on the back, sits perfect. I got 2 of the screws in there, a little stripped. Hopefully we can get those out one day and reuse this thing. But I don't even think I'll worry with the other 2 because it's just rock solid, but that looks awesome.